Briggs. How are you today? You're at the spot, the place, the location where the conversations are pointed, the guests are sharp, and the responses are never dull. And today we have Dr. Eva Hnizdo. She is originally from, I believe it's Czechoslovakia,
Yes, it
correct?
is indeed. Yes.
And she was there when it was tough times. I'm going to talk to her a little bit about that because you know what, Brains? What you don't know as Americans, and if you haven't traveled the world, is what it's like in a communist country. And if you're not careful, we may be looking down the barrel of that gun. She's also an amazing doctor, and I think she's still practicing, but beyond that, she is an accomplished published author. We have so much to touch on. Let's welcome her to the show. How are you, Dr. Eva?
Hello, I am well, and I'm actually retired, so I've got plenty of time, which is nice.
Wow, all the time to yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story, your journey, your truth, and how you came from the Czech Republic
Mhm.
to where you are now.
Well, I lived in a communist country, and obviously this is not that easy. I mean, there was some Czechoslovakia was relatively wealthy, so it was not the problem of not having enough food or anything like that. But the problem was not having enough freedom to travel, freedom to read. There was censorship. And basically, the main reason why I emigrated was that I didn't want my children to be told lies at school because all the history was in a Marxism socialism way. And there were certain things which were obviously not true, but that's what we were taught at school. And it's also my family, whenever my family decided not to emigrate, sorry.
So you immigrated. Well, that's good to know that you're still able to have money. People are under the assumption that if you are in a communist country that you are destitute, and some are, but you have no food, you have no education, you have no music, but there is censorship. And so you were married there and your children were born in
Yes,
the
they
Czech
were
Republic?
born there. Yes, we emigrated when they were 3 and 5.
Oh, wow.
And basically, whenever my family did not emigrate, like 1938, they were Jewish and they didn't emigrate from Czechoslovakia before the Nazis invaded. That was a mistake. A lot of them died. Then in 1948, the communists came to power. Again, my parents didn't emigrate. And in 1968, when I was 14, the Soviet army and the Warsaw Pact invaded our country because there was a reform which they didn't like. And again, I begged my parents to emigrate and they didn't want to. My mother said she was too old, she was 41. But so I was determined I'm going to emigrate. But then, of course, 3 years after we emigrated, the communist regime stopped. So it was hardly worth it in a way.
Okay, so when you say you had the freedom, it sounds like, to immigrate. You had the option to leave if you wanted to. You didn't have to sneak out.
No, we had to sneak out in a way. We had a permission to go to the West for 1 week and with our children, and that was quite unusual. And we were waiting for 5 years. We were asking somebody to get us the permission, and it always stopped. And they even asked us, "Do you want to leave your children behind?" And we said our parents are complete not babysitting, which was not true, but in the end we got it. But it was I was giving gifts to somebody. It was bribery, really. I was
Okay.
bringing some gifts, and then eventually we had the permission. And what was scary was in 1988, so we emigrated in 86. I got a letter from Ministry of Justice from Czechoslovakia that there has been an amnesty and I no longer have to go to prison for 5 years for leaving the country. So we were sentenced in our absence to 5 years in prison. But what was so scary was the fact that they found my address. I was surprised that they knew where I was. So,
Girl, I'm telling, that's what people think here in the United States. Oh, I don't like to be on social media. I don't like this. I don't like that. You are only a point and a click away. They know exactly who you are, down to your blood type, your medical records, your bank account, all of that. So I'm not saying
there
be
was no
overly
social
paranoid.
media then, of course.
No, no, but they still had a way of tracking you down. So
Yes.
you leave there and you decide to go into medicine with your children. Did your husband?
No, I was already a medical doctor. I was 32 when I immigrated, so I was already a practicing doctor there.
Wow. And then your husband, he migrated with you?
Yes, he did, but he was a university lecturer in political science and
Mm.
modern history, and it was quite difficult for him to find a job in England. So that was
To find
pro.
a job, but also find his footing because he actually knew what was going on in the communist regime. And then you move to something that's more democratic,
Yes.
westernized when you come to London. Was it quite an adjustment moving to London?
I always loved England. I had a pen friend since I was about 12 who I met in Bulgaria on the beach. He was British. And I always liked England because it's such a interesting country. It's completely different. I remember thinking that it's like Alice in Wonderland, from the driving on the left to different things. England is very, very different, and I liked it.
They accepted your credentials as a doctor?
I had to pass quite a lot of exams, but I did, and in the end, I started to be a GP again. The way to be a GP was slightly more complicated because normally I would have to work in a hospital for 5 years, and then I could have just become a GP without any further exams. But I didn't like working in hospital, so I always wanted to be a general practitioner. It's you meet more people.
That's amazing. Can I ask you about it?
You can.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Dr. Eva. You have a condition called Parkinson's. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what that is and how that affects people's body?
Well, it affects people body in many ways. Googling is absolutely deadly because it says that it's incurable progressive disease ending in dementia and disability. So reading is pretty scary, but it's not quite like this. I've had it for 13 years. I still ski, and despite being 70, and I exercise and I do a lot of things. It affects me sometimes with shaking. Some people shake. Uh, my balance is slightly worse than it used to be. Uh, some people are affected that their skills with their hands gets worse.
Is it a neurological disease?
Neurologically, it's a lack of a chemical called dopamine, which is produced in the brain, and it just gets slack, and nobody knows why it is. Doctors have got this name for the medicine for illnesses they don't know the reason. They call it idiopathic. Idiopathic means really we don't have a clue.
Wow. Well, I mean, you are able to still communicate and function and live a full life. Sometimes
Yes.
people get diagnosis and they feel that that is the end, and that was not the end for you. You decide to
No,
write a book. Tell us a
it's
little
a
bit
bit
about the book.
difficult, but yes. I wrote a book. Well, I always used to write poetry and different things as a child. And I always wanted to write, although I read a lot. And I the reason why I wrote it is that emigration is such an important problem in the world. And I wanted to put what happens to the people who leave and what happens to people who stay. And in my family, I always wondered why didn't they emigrate before the Nazis invaded? Because they were wealthy, they had possibilities. And in fact, I found out much later that they had a visa to be able to go to the United States, and they didn't use it because my great grandmother, who was a bit of a matriarch, said the Nazis will go. German, that's a civilized nation. We've lived in this country for 400 years. We're not going to go. And they all stayed. And I've seen a cousin of my mother in Philadelphia. They emigrated after the war. And she told me something quite horrific. She said, I will never forget my grandmother, that she killed my parents and my brother. And it sounds awful, but this grandmother told them not to go. They had a visa to the United States, and they all died in gas chambers. She
Wow.
was the only one surviving. And the grandmother survives, and it must have been so awful for her coming from the war and knowing that the grandchildren and children are dead.
Wow. Yeah, I have a few friends here in San Diego that are Holocaust survivors, and
Mhm.
they told me about their escape. how they were in the bottom of basements and had to crawl through windows and their trips here. And Americans, we have to remember that this country was built on immigrants.
Yes.
Okay? That's just how it is. But now we have become so anti-immigration. I understand both sides of it because I'm an American born and raised, and
Mm.
then we give money to other countries to fight wars that
Mm.
really don't impact me personally, my culture. I work hard, they work hard. But then there's a humanitarian aspect of it is that I don't want to see anybody suffer. If I
No.
have a piece of bread, I want to split it in half. How do we
I
how do we bridge that?
Yes. Well, I think obviously there will be some people who go for economic reasons, but even that, I think if somebody, it's normal for a person to have a better, to want to have a better life. And in fact, I feel, and that sounds, I'm an immigrant, of course, so it sounds a bit strange, but I think that the lazy and incompetent people usually don't emigrate because it's quite hard to go. They have to arrange it. So I think the countries where these people emigrate to are getting skills. And when I had patients who were what I used to call non-working working class, who were people who didn't want the job, they were on benefits, and in generations they didn't look for a job because they were comfortable not doing anything and paying benefits. The majority of these patients were white British,
Mm,
very immigrants and very little non-white British.
mm-hmm. I know.
So
Uh,
I
and
think,
and that's what they say here in the United States too, that a large percentage of the people that are getting the social services and on welfare are white, more so
mm,
because there's more white people than there are. But the political climate, we go back and forth and back, and we tear up these countries with bombs
yes,
and all this other stuff, and then we turn around and go back and rebuild them. I just don't understand why people are so angry. Do you understand? And maybe you can help me understand too. Why do people have such a disdain for Jews? They got a disdain for Black people, but what is it about the Jewish
I
culture?
can't understand it either. And I think it's just people don't like somebody who is slightly different. It's the same as color. And I could never understand it. Having said that, I come from a very assimilated, non-religious family. They the Jewishness in their family was not that important, but I cannot understand it. And what I don't like is sometimes people say that you are not typical Jewish, like they like me, I'm the token Jew, but they talk about the others. And I just think we are all the same. I've got friends from all different ethnic groups and nations. The only thing is, I have to speak the language they can speak, but I speak five languages, all of them with a Czech accent.
Mm,
And that's the only thing. And I often think about dogs. I know that sounds silly, but we say dogs are all the same, they're all dogs, but it's the Great Dane and the Chihuahua, and they don't have much in common. Yet we make a difference whether somebody is slightly darker color or has got different type of eyes, and we think they're completely different creatures. And yes, the species is the
They are,
same.
but you know what I do, and I don't maybe go along totally with that narrative that we're all
Mm.
the same. We are not all the same, in my opinion. I don't want to be a separatist. I don't want to treat you
Huh?
any different because you are a Jewish woman living in London from Czechoslovakia. But I want to
Mm.
recognize that. I want to embrace it. I want to love on it. I want to learn from it because it is different. Every flower in the garden is not the same. Here in
Of
the
course.
United States, you'll say an African American versus an African. Believe me, there's a stark difference. And Africans will let you know that they are not African American, that they are not Black Americans. So it is colorism and racism is a
Mm.
learned behavior. That is not something you will see. I post this picture all the time of a beautiful little, two little boys, a Palestinian little boy and a Jewish boy. They're hugged up. They love each other.
Yes.
They don't know any different. But the world is crazy, and I don't foresee an end to this. In your
Mm.
book, tell us a little bit about what's inside the pages of your book.
Yes. Well, it is a story, it's like a family saga from 1938 till 2006. It's partly in Czechoslovakia, then occupied by the Nazis, partly after the war, and there are different people who emigrated and who didn't. And some of the stories are real. In fact, the stories which, when you read them, you say that couldn't possibly happen. They're all true.
Hmm.
And I remember there was a quote that this difference between life and fiction is that fiction must make sense. I think Tom Clancy who said it, and that's funny.
What
But
was your writing? What was your writing process? Did you do a lot of searching of history? Did you recant on
I
your
did.
upbringing and your family?
I did lots of research about into my family. I asked different relatives. In fact, I met a relative I didn't know I had, which was I knew her younger brother, and I asked him what was it like because their family emigrated when it was still time to United States. And he said, I was only 6, ask my sister. She was 12. So I've got this 98-year-old relative who I now Zoom with every month and who told me a lot about the story of the family. It was very helpful, and we became close as well. So that's a nice thing. I did a lot of research into different ways of what happens in in the occupation because, for example, the yellow star is such a symbol that the Jews had to wear the yellow star, but in some countries they were not yellow. In Poland, for example, it was like the Israeli flag, it was white and blue, and it was different in every country. So I am quite picky when I read, so I didn't want to make a mistake uh,
Right.
like that.
And
I
again,
had
you want to record history as it
Yes.
was, how it impacted you. You know, everybody's story is different, and that's how we learn. We learn
Yes.
through pictures, we learn through stories. And
I
then,
also have the husband of the main character is Afro-Caribbean, and I have a very good friend whose parents came from Grenada, and I had lots of questions, and his mother asked answer them all, and then she read what I wrote, and I was very pleased that she was okay with it. So because I didn't want to be just a Czech or just a Jewish book, because the immigration is a common problem.
what sort of events or what sort of book signings have you done to introduce this into mainstream culture? Have you visited libraries? Have you done talks, speeches?
I done some. It's quite difficult as an unknown new author for somebody to get interested. I published it with a publisher it's called hybrid publisher. They offered me that they pay 60% of the expenses and I paid 40. So it's almost like self-published. They did arrange different interviews, but they wrote to a lot of magazines and newspapers without any reply. So it was quite difficult.
Well, it doesn't have to be difficult because I can give you some great tips. Brains, listen to this. What I always suggest is that donate your book to the local libraries as they
I did
promote
that.
their international role, but also ask the librarian, can you come in and do a 20-minute talk and bring cookies? They
Yes,
will really support that because
I did
it's,
ask about it and they were not interested, but I might ask again.
yeah, ask again because you never know what's going on. And you can do online book signings and
Yes.
online book readings. All of the people that you have on your Facebook, invite them for a sit down. So let's ask you some fun questions. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
Sorry?
No, I said, were you going to ask me another question? I thought you were about to say something.
No, no, I just said that I did have some. I had a BBC interview, which was nice. It was about emigration, but I also talked about the book. I
Exactly.
think I'll send you a link.
Let me ask you a question too. When you enter into a new country, now, did you speak fluent English? Well, you say you speak 5 languages, but were you fluent in English when you
I
left?
was fluent, but not as fluent as I am now. I mean, my accent hasn't changed. I think with the accent, I used to pay attention to how I pronounce things, whereas now I just talk. But
Exactly.
I mean, I wrote a book in English and it's okay. And in fact, in my surgery in the office, we had 5 doctors and lots of receptionists and nurses. When there was a spelling mistake, they asked me how to spell it, which was very funny because I was the only non-born English speaker.
Oh,
I
I
knew,
know.
I knew the grammar better than they did.
And English is a very difficult language.
It is.
More so than people assume. And there's so many people in this country that are not multilingual. Now,
Hmm.
what 5 languages do you speak?
Czech, obviously, German, French, Russian, and English.
Wow,
But
that's a
if you come from a small nation, nobody speaks Czech, so you learn foreign languages because nobody learns Czech.
so in Czech they would speak maybe more Russian than they do Czech.
No, I mean, it's not even that, I mean, it is a Slavonic language. First thing, we had to learn Russian and we didn't like it because it was a symbol of the communism. And of course, they invaded my country in 1968. So my Russian could be better. If I learned another foreign language for 14 years at school, I think it would be better than my Russian is. My passive Russian is okay, but I never really spoke it because we avoided speaking to Russian people, which is of course unfair because they're not all the same.
Right, right. What if you had an opportunity to speak to a classroom of students that are in the Ukraine right now, that are going through the invasion of Russia and all of that?
Yes.
What would be your words of hope and inspiration to them?
Well, unfortunately, there is not much hope unless they don't lose the war. Because if Putin takes over, then it's going to be the same as what they don't want to. I would, the encouragement, if I was to talk to somebody, is that you can live your life even when the country is, uh, everything is censored and you know that the news are not correct. It was very interesting because we all used to listen to Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and English broadcast from foreigners. It was in Czech. And whenever there was something happening which was important, they scrambled it. So when it was scrambled, we knew there is something happening. Of course, now it's internet, so you can always get information. But I always remember Solzhenitsyn said once, and it's an amazing quote, and that is, they lying. We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying. They're still lying.
Wow. All right, I'm
That
going to
is,
take you to another part of the country, another part of the world. And we don't want to get really political, but we want to be empathetic. And I want to understand from a different perspective everything that is going on between Palestine and Israel.
yes.
I understand Hamas. Don't get me wrong. Okay, now they're some booger wolves.
But
But
it's
that's
it's
not all, but that is not all the people. And here in the United States, it is such an upheaval on these college campuses. And
yes.
in my opinion is that a lot of these people are really not for the cause. They want to cause problems.
They don't know. They were asking them which river, from the river to the sea, and they asked him which river and which sea, and they didn't know.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, the bombardment is terrible, and
it is bombardment. And I see in my eyes, I see almost like an ethnic cleansing.
yes.
When you take
I
out
worry about,
hospitals, you take out
yes, for
hospitals,
sure.
you take out
Yeah.
pregnant women, you take out children.
Mm. On the other hand, I think, funnily enough, the most horrible thing about this whole conflict for me was something will happen to a friend of mine who is an American. She's slightly older than I am, and she is extremely sensible. She sees the Palestinian question, although she's Jewish. She sends money to Palestinian children and charities. She is really, I would say, she thinks well, but you would expect in her position that she may be more pro-Israeli than she is. She was in a party in Florida, and somebody came to her and told her that she's got blood on her hands because she's Jewish.
Wow.
And I found that shocking because that is anti-Semitism. That's nothing to do with Israel. That is just, and I find it scary because once it gets against every Jew, we'll
Right,
where we were
right.
before.
But that's ignorance.
Yes, of
That's
course.
ignorance. There's so many people haven't even in the United States. I think it's only 40% of people even have a passport.
Mm.
And I have
Yes,
been to communist countries. And,
yes.
I'm very careful because here I am a black woman. They know I stand out. But
The
I
other,
go in with a curious eye. I go in with respect. I go in with an understanding and being polite, not trying to take over. Matter of fact, to uh,
Mm,
we're going to Thailand in a few days, and
mm,
the thing that concerns me is that I hope that some of these people that have really never traveled go
yeah.
with a sense of wonderment and a sense of respect. You are the guest in someone else's home.
Mhm. What I think is also important is that the journalists or even tourists realize that if a country is not free, there could be secret police everywhere. So when they ask political questions of people they don't know, and they get an answer that yes, we love Putin, everything is wonderful, they do that get an answer not necessarily because people believe it, but because they don't know whether there is a spy. If somebody stopped me in Prague when I was at university and asked me whether I loved the Soviet Union, which I didn't, I would say yes, because it's not worth me losing my university posts because of somebody asking me. So I think the journalists need to be more careful, hide the faces of these people they ask, maybe distort the speech. If somebody's filmed on television and they live in a country which is not free, they're in great danger and not everybody wants to risk it.
No, and they will find you. They will
Yes.
definitely find you. So let's ask you some fun, interactive questions. Okay.
Okay.
If you were not a doctor,
Mhm.
what other profession would you have chosen?
I always wanted to do something with people, and in a way, that's why I'm a GP and not a hospital specialist. I only went into medicine because my mom told me that that's where I should go, and that I can move out if I don't
Oh,
go into medical school. So we had an agreement. My mother was quite a difficult person. We had an agreement that if I pass the exam, I learn for the exam. If I go, I will leave after a year if I don't like it. And my mom said, yes, of course. I can imagine the scenes if I decided to leave. But I didn't because we were divided by sports and I'm a passionate skier and we were all skiers, so we were friends. We started going skiing together. And I just stayed in medical school because of the company, mainly.
wow. So you would have been a professional athlete? You would have been a skier?
Well, not completely, not like international competition. It was university competition. It's not. I ski well, but I'm not like a proper competitor.
Have you had an opportunity to go back to Czechoslovakia or
Yes.
Russia?
Since 1989, the regime stopped and we could go back. So I went first in 1990 and I've got a flat in Prague now, so I go a lot.
Do you take your children or
Yes,
grandchildren?
yes, and grandchildren, yes.
Yeah. What is their take on it?
Well,
What do
my children didn't remember really what it was like because they were 5 and 3. So they only know the Czechoslovakia when the communists left. So I think they like it, but they're British. They're calcium. They're only.
you say they're British. They're different.
I
Okay.
think in a way I am British. A lot of people ask me, would I go back? And I don't think I would. I spent most of my life in England. And also, being an alien is an advantage because you can do whatever crazy things you want to do. And people just think it's part of your culture.
You can get away with it. That's
Yeah.
good. What is your favorite Czechoslovakian meal that you prepare?
Roast pork with dumplings and sauerkraut, and it's with caraway seed.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Heavy, but it's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Well, heavy. Yeah. Well, you might have to send me the recipe. That is good.
Okay, I will.
If you were an appliance in the kitchen of all places, what appliance would you be?
Appliance in the kitchen. That's an interesting question. I think I would be a wooden spoon to stir things.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, they spank hands here in the United States with wooden spoons.
I
That's
also have nice spoons with faces.
hmm,
I'll I'll show you.
they're beautiful. I bet they're beautiful. Are they collector items?
No, you just buy them instead of
Oh,
the normal ones.
that's me. If you were a flower in the garden, what flower would you be, Dr. Eva?
Mm. That's an interesting question. Maybe a daffodil because they flower early, and I'm an impatient woman.
Oh, they are. And we use that as a symbolism for cancer survivors. This
Right.
a yellow daffodil here in the
Yeah.
United States. If you
It's
were,
also it flowers very early in England because in England first spring starts in February, really.
wow. So if you were a car, what kind of car would you be?
Hmm. Something which makes a lot of noise because I talked a lot. So I don't know, an old, loud little car.
Oh, okay, like a little
My
sports car.
first my first car was a Trabant, which was made out of paper, really. I like cardboard. It was an East German car. It was the cheapest car you could get, and when you crashed it, it looked like cardboard. That was quite funny.
Wow. So, do you have a copy of your book there with you?
Yes, I do.
Hold on. Say
Maybe
something more.
higher so that it's with the picture. It's a Charles Bridge, girl walking over the Charles Bridge.
Okay, perfect.
Mm, yeah.
We got a beautiful picture of the book. Tell us, where can we purchase a copy of Why Didn't I Leave?
They leave. It's on Amazon, and I don't know whether they have it in bookstores. They did in the beginning, but I think nowadays it's probably just on Amazon.
Where would you like to see this book going? Would you like to sell more copies? Would you like it to be a mini series? Would you like it to be a play? Where,
I
if
would
you
like people to read it. So I would like maybe to get it somehow to student literature classes if they talk about books written about the totalitarian regimes, because most of the totalitarian regimes are there in the book. Emigration is always an important prospect. Uh, I think that's important that people realize what's involved and and how it is to live in another country and things like this.
but also the emotion and the human compassion what
Yes.
people go through. I look at again all these war torn countries. Do you think, Brains, that these people just woke up one day and said, you know what? I want to be walking down the street barefoot with my child,
Yes.
hungry, not knowing if I'm going to have a roof over my head, if I'm going to be sexually assaulted, if I'm going to be called into war. Do you think that they like that when they had
Of
a beautiful home and they had a car and they had groceries and their kids were going to school? You have to understand the compassion, and we have to have compassion
yes.
for people. But I'm so excited, Dr. Eva, you're going to give us a reading, a short excerpt. Introduce that to us. What are we talking
Yes.
about?
This is Zuzana, which is the main character of the book talking. She was born after the war. The book starts with her mother, but this is when she was a teenager in 1967, and when she found out she was Jewish.
Oh,
My
okay.
parents never told me I was Jewish. As a child, I knew my grandfather and other relatives died in the war, but not why. I'm not sure why I never asked. I think I understood that my parents didn't want to talk about it. Or maybe, like many teenagers, I was too self centered to be interested. My ignorance was made easier by the fact that nobody talked about the Jews. Yes, we learned at school about concentration camps for people who were fighting the Nazis, but the Holocaust was never mentioned. In our textbook, it was mainly the communists that were persecuted by the Nazis. There were some non-specific reference to anti-fascists, but no details. The Holocaust of the Roma, Gypsies were never mentioned either. Even when censorship lifted and I read novel with Jewish characters, I never thought that those characters had anything to do with me. I remember once, when I was 9 years old, a girl told me that her parents thought I was Jewish. I told her it wasn't true and that I didn't know any Jewish people. When I came home, I asked my mother. You shouldn't really be friends with people like this, she said. In 1967, our relatives from Holland came to visit. It was their first visit. When I asked Uncle Otto why they didn't come before, he told me about their illegal emigration in 48 and that he was afraid the police would not let them leave again if they came to Czechoslovakia. Now it was no longer dangerous for them. When I was a teenager, I read a lot, and lots of lot of those newly published books contradicted my history textbooks. Later, when foreigners talk about Prague Spring, I always told them that the spring lasted for at least 4 years. The year 1967 felt free. That day in 67, we were all walking with Uncle Otto and Aunt Marie in the old town when we came to the old Jewish cemetery. I liked that cemetery with its haphazard tombstones. It was a solemn place. Then we went to the Pinkas synagogue. On the walls inside, in alphabetical orders, there were names of 78,000 Czech Jews killed in the war. I have been there once before, so I wasn't taking much notice. But then the shock came. Mum and Uncle Otto were looking for names, and there they were. My grandfather Bruno, his son Oscar, Mum's cousin Irma's parents, and many other relatives I had heard before. Otto, Marie, my grandma Francie, and my mum spent a long time finding all the names. When we left the museum, my grandmother was crying and my mother was holding her hand. Mom, I'm confused. I thought the names on the walls were Jewish, I said. One would think my mother would tell me the truth then, but she changed the subject. That was how I found I was Jewish. Later, I met many people of my generation with similar experiences. One of my friends came home complaining that a boy called her Jew. She thought it was a swearing, and I beat him up, she said. Do you want to see a Jew? Asked her father. Yes. Where? Asked my friend, then aged 13. Look at the mirror, said the father.
You know, it's hard that children were not here as an example. Hispanics that come from across the border from Guatemala or El Salvador, South America, Mexico, they're not told that they shouldn't speak Spanish.
Yes, that is a mistake.
Yes. You're not knowing that you're Jewish, not knowing your heritage, not knowing my family was Native American. This is who we are.
Unfortunately, recently, with the new Gaza conflict and with the anti-Semitism against people who have nothing to do, when people connect me with Israel, it's a foreign country for me, and I feel that I'm not connected in any way. And I often now think about my mother and my parents when they didn't want me to know I was Jewish because they thought it was, if I didn't know I was Jewish, other people wouldn't know either.
Mm.
Starting to worry about my grandchildren because they might be affected, and if they didn't know, maybe they wouldn't.
Well, in my opinion, if you don't know, you don't want the world to reveal it to you when your parents could have told you who you are.
That's true.
You can stand up for who you are. You can be
Yeah.
respected for who you are. You know,
Yes.
I am very diverse. I've been to many countries. I've dated
Yes.
many other ethnicities outside of my own.
Yes.
I am a
I
strong
think you're right.
Black American woman, and I will tell you, and I will stand up for it, and I will fight, and I will put you in your place if you call me anything outside of that, because it's a certain pride. But it's different for everyone. It can be
The 13-year-old friend who was told by her father to look in the mirror, she told me when we spoke about it recently, we're still friends, that some people would remind me if I didn't tell my grandchildren, that some people would remind them.
Mhm.
And that's probably true.
And sometimes they remind them in the harshest way. They don't
I
tell them
also,
about the beauty of
yes,
the culture and the history of what that is. They tell them in a derogatory way to make them feel bad or shame them. And I don't think that's the best way to introduce it. But thank you so much for that
thank you.
um, uh, ground, because we don't own everything and we can't take over everything.
No,
Thank
of
you
course.
so much for being with me, Dr. Eva. You have been a wealth of information. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Please tell my brains how to get in contact with you and how to purchase a copy of the book.
Well, it is on Amazon. I think that's probably the quickest way of doing it. The book is called Why Didn't They Leave? Which means why didn't they emigrate, really? And they can get in touch with me. I can give you my details. I'm quite happy to have my email and website and blog.
Well, I'm
For
going to go ahead and put all of that information in the back of the interview. Brains, Step outside your comfort zone. During the spring, the summer, you're sitting there, read something totally different than what you've experienced before. Transport yourself to another country, to another time, to a different experience. See how that difference is very similar to who we are. Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. You're the best. Brains, I'd like for you to go in, love, like, share, and subscribe. Love, like, share,
Right.
and subscribe. And we
Yes.
put all the information in the back. We love you dearly. Yes, we do. Thank you so much. We'll
Thank
keep
you
in
very
touch.
much.